The hard place, like a wind from Goldland he sweeps by, blown far from his homeland in search of glory and honor. We walk in the garden of his turbulence.
Hello and welcome to Movie Joust. My name is Jesse Nussman, a film critic living here in Atlanta, Georgia, and with me on the other line, firing up his favorite lesbian romance paperback novel.
While holding a baseball bat.
While holding a baseball bat. It's fellow Atlanta film critic Josh Sewell. Josh, welcome.
Thank you very much. So we're picking up the slack for that world traveler Jason, who's just, worthless, man. How dare he enjoy time with his wife, right?
Yeah, how dare he spend time with his families instead of, fighting in the trenches of late August movie slop like we're currently doing.
Right. How dare he have fun instead of talking about mediocre films?
Yeah. So, Josh, we've reached the end of August, which is kind of traditionally this weird dumping ground for the movies. And we picked two to talk about this week that are kind of an interesting pair. They are both from, I think, pretty major filmmakers, as well as they are kind of in a tradition that I personally admire, which is kind of like a dingy, pulpy paperback crime novel. In one corner we have Honey Don't, which is the new film from Ethan Coen of the Coen Brothers, and starring Margaret Qualley as a lesbian private eye. And I believe is it somewhere in Texas? I believe
it's Bakersfield.
Bakersfield, okay. And a case she has that may or may not deal with a mischievous, horny, nefarious pastor played by Chris Evans. Yes. And then in the other end, we have Caught Stealing, which is the new film from Darren Aronofsky, starring Austin Butler as a washed-up baseball player who is now bartending in New York, has a drinking problem, and is thrusted into this after-hours-esque crime saga where he is darting all over New York City with a cat and dodging all kinds of various criminals, Jewish, Puerto Rican, Russian, it just
etc.
Yeah, etc. A very fierce Regina King coming after him as well. So, Josh, I'm curious, which one of these movies do you want to start with first? Because I think we can kind of tie a lot of elements
I think so.
together about them, especially since they are working in sort of a similar tradition of kind of pulpy B-movie noir. Which one are you sort of most drawn to talking about first, and then we can kind of weave in between them?
So, I think let's start with Caught Stealing because it's the newest. It's the most relevant. By the time this podcast comes out, it's probably going to be the one that's on everybody's mind based on box office returns. Honey Don't did not do the best last week.
No. So I'm curious.
But I do really think they are of a piece. I agree.
Yeah. So have you read the novel that this is based on? I'm trying to look up who the writer of the novel is, who also wrote the movie, but essentially the premise, as we said, Austin Butler, is neighbors with a sort of British punk played by Matt Smith. Matt Smith is like, "Hey man, I got to go out of town. Can you watch my cat for me?" Austin Butler's like, "Sure, I'm a little busy sleeping around with Zoe Kravitz, but sure, I'll watch your cat for you."
It's a tough life.
real tough life. Just like slinging beers, hanging out at like the dingiest New York bar. Which put a pin in that because I have some thoughts about like the whole grunge aesthetic of this movie. And pretty soon knocking on his door are a variety of different gangsters that all want something that the Matt Smith character has and claims he owes them money, and see Austin Butler is the only way to get to it. So, I'll admit, I found this movie pretty obnoxious and kind of annoying, and it weirdly lived up to a a take about it I had heard when the previews for this first started coming out, which was I heard a lot of comments of like, this looks like kind of a relic from that mid-90s, even though the movie is set in 98, but that kind of like mid to late 90s period of like post-Pulp Fiction Tarantino knockoffs. And this kind of feels like the late to the party addition from Darren Aronofsky to that kind of movie. What did you make of Caught Stealing?
Yeah, that's 100% correct. When the screening was over, I leaned over to a colleague of ours and I was like, first of all, I'm like, how dare you make 1998 a period piece? Like, I am not okay with that.
It's all the rage with the Gen Z kids. This is like,
right?
That, I mean, that gets into my like aesthetic thing we'll get to later, but continue.
Yeah, but I was like, how dare you do that when it takes place in an era that is, oh God, almost 30 years ago. So, you know, that after I got over that, as someone who lived through that era and was there for the Pulp Fiction revolution, this is very much of that era of Pulp Fiction knockoff, where they're trying to do something similar. You've got this huge cast of crazy characters. It's hyper violent, but it also doesn't really attain the heights that a movie like that is grungy and low down and gross like Pulp Fiction is. So it feels like an oxymoron that, like, you know, but with Caught Stealing, it feels like, you know, something I said to somebody earlier was like, I don't know why I'm surprised that a Darren Aronofsky movie would be so mean. It's not like he has an entire filmography to look back on. But this is just like, you know, it's a weird tonal mix between like dark comedy, which I'm totally fine with, and like real stakes and really bad things happen to practically everybody in the film.
Very brutally violent things.
Yeah,
and I almost think that's
bleak.
That's sort of my problem with the movie is I don't think the tone that it is searching for is necessarily like, I don't have any kind of like moral objection to it, but
absolutely, yeah.
It is trying to sort of be both this like nasty, vicious piece of like pulp entertainment while also kind of like a cheeky, fun, good time at the movies. Like a movie where like a main character could get shot in the face and then someone would be like, what the fuck was that? As like a punchline is like the kind of movie it's trying to be, which is that sort of weird balance that I think, you know, speaking of Pulp Fiction, that someone like Tarantino is kind of very skilled at navigating that tone. Yeah. And I would say, you know, Aronofsky, who's made, you know, if any of our listeners don't know, has made movies like Black Swan and Requiem for a Dream and the infamous Mother!
And The Whale.
The Whale, yes, the feel-good movie of 2022. This is a guy that is drawn to human suffering in so many ways and is so effective, even though I wouldn't say I'm very all over the place with his filmography. I don't know what your feelings on Darren Aronofsky are.
When he hits, he hits, but like...
Yeah, I think the movies of his I like the most or that have worked the most for me are ones where like stuff like Black Swan or Mother, before it sort of fully becomes obvious it's a Bible allegory. Like the movies where he's just sort of like, I'm just here to make you squirm and feel gross. He's got a real knack for that kind of viciousness. I mean, there's an argument to be made. Go ahead.
I'm even like, I don't know if I'm in the minority or not, but like I even really kind of liked what he did with Noah, which is taking a story that is very sort of basic that we all know and having the guts to do something different or interesting with it despite the pushback he's going to get.
That's a good point. I remember seeing that movie with my uncle and like us walking out and kind of like, I don't know that we necessarily enjoyed it, but we're sort of like, I admire that, like, he just, like, went for it and was like, I'm gonna make a, like, mean, nasty, like, cosmic fantasy Noah's Ark movie.
Yeah, and I mean, and it kind of ties into what he's saying with kind of with this film, which is like, who do we decide are heroes despite their behavior, and who do we decide are, anti-heroes or villains, even though a lot of them are behaving in very similar ways.
Yeah. I think my Aronofsky problem, though, is that when he tries to sort of switch into a lighter type of tone, it doesn't really work with me. I mean, that was sort of my problem with The Whale, is I remember seeing that at TIFF and sort of just being, I think, getting the Brendan Fraser hype, but sort of being maddened by this movie that both was sort of asking you to have empathy for this person who, in our sort of normal society, we would kind of view at with a bit of disgust, but also the movie is sort of relishing in that disgust.
Yeah.
And that is sort of the tension that I had with Caught Stealing, is like, I think Aronofsky thinks he's making his version of like After Hours, and he doesn't. Or even the other example I thought of is like his version of like a Safdie's Brothers movie.
I was thinking along those lines, like a movie that it feels like it's trying to be, but doesn't get there as far as like the tonal shifts, is something like In Bruges. Is something like In Bruges.
Oh, that's
where
another
you have
good
these
example.
Really wild swings where you're laughing your butt off 1 second and then just being gut punched by, a turn in the story.
Yeah, and even like, but I think he can't quite manage that swing to a kind of lightness. And there's a way in which this movie also frustrated me in sort of, it's like, I think I called it like faux punk when we walked out of the theater, which to me, this is sort of, it feels this kind of like, I know Aronofsky is Gen X, and I'm not Gen X, so I don't have, you as the Gen X person maybe can weigh in on this, but to me it just sort of reeked of a kind of like fake Gen X punkness that would be at place in like an Urban Outfitters store, but really does not feel tangible in the way that, like, to compare it to After Hours or the Safdie's Brothers stuff, there's a way in which, like, all the weird characters that you interact with in, like, a Safdie's Brothers movie and the swirling chaos and sort of grunginess of that, just, it feels like they just sort of, like, set up a camera on the side of the street. And in many cases, that is just what they did, because those guys are just like, like Aronofsky got their start just as like low budget, grimy indie filmmakers. But there's a way in which their worlds feel so tangible and so just sort of like they just turned the camera on and life was happening in front of them. And even with After Hours, which is able to be this sort of fun, manic, middle of the night anxiety inducing comedy, there's a way in which Scorsese, as a lifelong New Yorker, seems to kind of understand, even as cartoonish as that movie can be, understand the world of it. And even though Aronofsky is a New Yorker, I just sort of didn't buy anything about the kind of like the various different characters that are sort of thrown into this movie. And I never felt that he was able to make it feel like this sort of cohesive world that we get to exist in, that you would understand being able to like run into, the Orthodox Jew hitman and the sort of, foul-mouthed cop played by Regina King, or, have the like Puerto Rican club owner who's hanging out with, the Russian gangsters that sing like "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" as they're like punching and kicking guys. There's just a lot of like, oh, this would be a funny bit to throw on a character, but it doesn't make sense in sort of the overall kind of like, mise en scène of the movie that you're watching to me. And it just sort of rang as kind of like, this feels just kind of like false and hollow, and feels like a weird like Hollywood attempt to do kind of something mean and grungy, but not fully committing to it, if that makes sense.
It does. I think, weirdly, like, we agree, but we're coming at it from different directions. Like, you view those things as negative, whereas I view them as kind of the point. Because you've got, with Aeronaut, it's clear the After Hours homages are intentional. You don't cast Griffin Dunn
he's
as
even
the
got
bartender.
Griffin Dunn as the bar owner.
So there's clearly some after hours thrown in, but you've also got, even, when you talk about the faux punk aspect, it's pretty clear that the real punk in the film that is played by Matt Smith is an idiot who also doesn't know what he's doing.
Yes.
So it's this punk aspect that, like, yeah, I think I'm cool and edgy and I know what's going on. No, you're an idiot just like our main character who, like, you've been in this world for way longer than Austin Butler's character, but then this guy who doesn't know what he's doing is still somehow better than you at this world. Like, it kind of points to the fakeness of the world.
Which is sort of the thing that then came back as, like, frustrating to me, is, like, I don't buy this guy, like, using the Matt Smith character of, like, I don't buy this character, this, all of the sort of signifiers of, like, 90s New York grunginess just felt like, it felt like wallpaper to me, and it felt a little like almost overly stylized to draw attention to itself and not feeling authentic in the way that, when I compared it to something like, what the Safdie brothers do in like a lot of their movies, and sort of like that just feels like the ecosystem that they are sort of shooting in, and almost like the world around them is, forcing what is in front of the camera. This felt just, I don't know, it felt like a costume party to me. That's really, I think, like, the best way to think about it is everything in it just rang as like, this is kind of fake to me.
Okay, well, so to me, like, what, you bring up the Safdie brothers, like, it is absolutely like a heightened world, but it still has sort of a hyper reality to call its own, like, because you're aware of the stakes at all time. And I feel like with Caught Stealing, it feels like it's in this other type of world where it's, I don't know, like, I don't know a way to describe it. It feels like these characters who know they're in a movie, but that things are getting real regardless. So it's like, what if characters in a stereotypical noir movie suddenly were experiencing the stakes of a traditional noir story?
Yeah.
And your mileage may vary, right? Like, that may work for some people, it may not. I don't think it's an accident that Aronofsky is drawn to this kind of story. It's set in 1988, which, again, midlife crisis is hitting hard.
98.
98, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's the year Pi came out.
That is true.
Which was,
yeah.
And as a filmmaker who has flirted with mainstream films that he never made, like, Aronofsky circled Batman at multiple iterations.
He was going to do Watchmen at some point, like, even though I know that's a little less commercial, but yeah.
So part of me is wondering if this is his version of the Austin Butler's character of story of, what if I didn't, blow out my knee in a drunk driving accident? What if I did make it to the majors? Because whether it works or not, and I think everybody's going to have their own view on that, I would argue this is still Aronofsky's most mainstream film he's ever made.
I would definitely agree.
It feels like this is like a straight down the middle fastball from somebody who's used to, like, to stay with the baseball metaphor, right? Who's used to, like, fancy pitching to trick the batter. This is a guy who's just like, I'm going to throw it as fast and hard as I can and see what happens.
Yeah, I could definitely agree of this. This definitely feels like him very consciously of, like, and I feel like he said that in interviews of, like, after The Whale, he was like, I want to do something a lot more kind of pop and kind of, more of his version of a popcorn movie, which I guess this is, but I just sort of found the experience grating at a certain point.
And part of this, we can't, yes, auteur theory and all that, Aronofsky is the director, but you've also got, like you were saying earlier, Charlie Huston, who wrote the novel, also wrote the screenplay. So this is his character and his world. And
I wonder if maybe like you bringing that up, like, I haven't read the book. I wonder if it's maybe something of, like, that world feels better realized on the page, and maybe just it's a case of, like, and maybe that sort of, like, weird tone of the sort of cartoonishness of it, while also the brutality sort of works a little bit better with his prose than maybe it does when Aronofsky is sort of now trying to literalize it on screen. If you don't have any more
like also that
thoughts, do you want to transition?
I was just going to say, like, it looks like if you're going by books, Caught Stealing is the first in a series of 3 novels. I don't know if the movie is setting you up for a sequel. I would be surprised if we get a sequel because Aronofsky doesn't really strike me as a sequel guy. But as far as the Austin Butler character, who, by the way, I think he's really solid in this. Like, he's had a very hit or miss career post Elvis, but it's this is very much, as far as the novels go, the first act in a 3-act narrative arc. So I don't know if that has anything to do with the fact that by the end you were sort of left wanting more a little, but I guess we'll see what most people think. The reviews are starting to come out. The embargo lifted as we're recording today, and right now on Rotten Tomatoes, which as we all know is the be all end all of critical assessment,
is the be all end all.
Yeah. Yes. It's sitting at 87% right now. So whether that is a bunch of
I think more people need to go watch After Hours
if that's the case. Yeah. But it is very much. It is very much based on this sort of 90s nostalgia. It's got a great soundtrack. That was very much what was blasting in my radio during high school. But I can see how that would feel like sort of a Disney Worldification of New York, of 90s New York to some people.
So let's talk about let's finish with Honey Don't, which is now the second time that Ethan Coen has teamed up, not with his brother, but with his partner, spouse. Are you? I really don't want to get it wrong. It's
right. It is. They are
Trisha Cook, but I've gotten
they're
wrong
technically
before
married, but they have what we will say a non-traditional marriage. She is
because
she's an out lesbian.
Yes,
and it feels like their marriage is more of like a sort of like a friendship, professional collaborator relationship rather than one of a traditional what we would think of as marriage.
Sure, I mean no. Hey, if they can make it work, all the better. And I send them the best. I only say that because when people are in those complicated situations, I wanna be respectful enough to get it right. And hopefully I did. But yes,
send your mail to Jesse Nussman.
Yes, right. At me on Twitter or X, whatever it's called. But yeah, this is his second time not collaborating with Joel, his brother, but collaborating with his spouse. Their previous movie was Drive Away Dolls that came out a couple years ago. They apparently have a third film in sort of what they've dubbed a kind of like lesbian crime comedy trilogy. I believe that third one will also star Margaret Qualley, who I have to say, as frustrated as I am by both of these movies that they've made, I really like her in the Coen's mold. She has such a gift for that. They're kind of like very stylized pitter-patter dialogue and kind of double talk. This movie though, I think this is even kind of a step down from Drive Away Dolls,
interesting. Okay.
Which I think Drive Away Dolls, I remember, well, that's sort of the problem is I don't really remember much of Drive Away Dolls, but remember it being like a forgettable, but like okay, like charming enough time at the movies that I sort of like then just sort of exited my brain afterwards. But I think there's a way in which that movie was like so front-loaded in its raunchiness in a way where this movie is, I think, trying to be a bit more in that sort of traditional Coen Brothers mold. And it's been interesting. I've been going back lately and rewatching a lot of the Coen Brothers movies, which just like it's all good. It's all so good.
There are
really
worse
only
ways to spend an afternoon.
There's really only like two that are. There's really only one that's bad, because even like Intolerable Cruelty is not great, but is like better than its reputation would have you believe. And then it was interesting seeing this movie and thinking about the ways in which it is so undeniably has the Coen DNA in it.
It does.
You know, their fascination with like pulp paperbacks, the sort of cartoonish humor that they sometimes have, the way that characters sort of double talk in this very stylized speech.
Yes.
But this movie, comparing it weirdly to Caught Stealing, feels very unrealized and kind of half-baked to me. There's a way in which, going back and watching a lot of these Coen Brothers movies, that even the lesser ones, the worlds of them feel so considered, and so you get the feeling like Joel and Ethan Coen have fully realized every inch of this world, to the most minor characters in something like Fargo or Hudsucker Proxy. You feel like they have a whole like biography set for these people, and you sort of fully understand these characters as three-dimensional people as well. And I don't know if that's I'm wondering now, with this being the second time that Ethan has made a movie with his spouse, that maybe it's just like they just like are one of those partnerships where like they need each other. And it isn't even as simple as like, I remember when Drive Away Dolls came out and it was like, oh, so Ethan's the funny one.
Right,
you know what
exactly.
I mean? Because Joel's like solo movie with his spouse was just doing Macbeth. Yeah.
In black and white.
A very black and white, very brooding version of Macbeth with Denzel Washington. But now I kind of feel like, because you hear those stories of like when they're working together and they'll like purposely like write each other into corners, and then the other one will kind of like figure it out. And there's something to this movie, sort of it feeling like half a Coen Brothers movie to me. And like I can see the elements of things that I love, and wanted so much to like come into here and being like, you know, the auteur purist that is like, yes, but if you're a real Coen Brothers fan, you'll recognize all these elements in there. But there's just a way in which the characters have none of the subversive nuance that a lot of their other characters, even in their cartoonish movies like Raising Arizona or Big Lebowski, there's always like a surprising nuanced element to their characters that I feel like does not come through here. And so everyone feels sort of like a caricature here. And then the world that these characters are occupying doesn't feel as like fleshed out and as detailed in the way that, you know, again, to use something that is, you know, as overlooked as the Hudsucker Proxy, which is by no means their best film, but a movie that is just overflowing with like so much imagination. And I miss that here. And it felt like something that was just kind of like hastily written and shot and just sort of like thrown out there for the world. But I know you enjoyed it more than I did. So,
well, I was going to say, I think it sounds like I liked it more than you, but you know, I will agree that it's a flawed film, but I think I admire it more for, you know, the performances. Like we said, even though the movie itself has issues, Margaret Qualley's fantastic. You know, Chris Evans is in peak slimeball mode here. I feel like, you know, not being Captain America anymore has given him like the freedom to just play the most despicable characters possible.
I weirdly didn't buy him in this movie. That's so interesting that you really liked him. He's just someone that, like, I don't know, like the Coen. And thinking about other kind of matinee idol good looks people, like, you know, in a way that like Channing Tatum sort of makes sense in a Coen Brothers movie, or Brad Pitt sort of makes sense in I don't know. There's just something about like I couldn't buy Chris Evans in the cartoonishness. So like that's so interesting to me that you like really liked him in this movie, because he every time he was on screen I was like, this is not working. Like I admire the swing for goofiness that he's doing and want him to play a smarmy little a-hole in more movies, but he just like did not work for me in the Coen milieu.
Okay, fair enough. But the other thing, like, I will agree that this one, having watched Drive Away Dolls and Honey Don't pretty close together,
Mhm.
you watch Drive Away Dolls and you're like, oh, Burn After Reading was Ethan.
Yeah.
Because it even deals with some of the same, like, MacGuffins and
Both
plot
have
points,
dildo jokes. Both have great
Right.
dildo jokes.
And with this one, it feels like they're kind of overcorrecting for that, because it does feel in the same sort of DNA as a traditional
Totally.
Coen Brothers movie, but because there's a lot of Raising Arizona in this. There's a
Yes.
lot of Big Lebowski in this, both in the way that you
Yes.
think the mystery is one thing, and then by the end, like, does it resolve? Does it not? There's that question of, like, what just happened here, that happens in a lot of noir films, right?
Right.
But it does, I will agree, like, even though, I had a good time, the one thing I love about the movies that Ethan does with Trisha Cook is, like, you're in and out in an hour and 28 minutes. Like, so even if you don't like it, it's a quick
Even the
sit,
pure Coen Brother like collaborations, like I've been sort of amazed going back, and I was like, wait, Fargo is like an hour and 45 minutes.
Right,
You know what I
exactly.
mean? Like they're
so-
real in and out guys.
But with this one particularly, even though I liked it, it really does feel like, Queen with Adam Lambert, or
Yeah.
Journey
Yeah,
when they found that
that's so
Filipino
great.
guy to replace Steve Perry, where, like, you're hitting all the beats, there's just something missing, and you can enjoy it.
Oomph missing. Yeah.
And you can enjoy it for what it is, which is a solid cover. But still say, like, even though I liked it, it's clearly not in the same league as a true blue collaboration between the two guys.
Josh, I want to ask you before we hop off, because it's getting darker and my lighting setup is getting less and less good. Do you have a favorite Coen Brothers movie, or like one that is not the sort of like obvious pick of like Fargo or No Country or
No Country,
Big Lebowski? Totally fine, because all three like undeniable classics. But I'm curious if
you're
have
not
going to
hear me say, like,
those.
you're not going to hear me be like, no, not to those. But the one that I feel like is sadly relevant, like, more than we could have ever predicted at the time, is Burn After Reading. Like, it's the idiocracy of the Coen Brothers movies, where you can
really
look at
is
Burn
them
After
doing
Reading,
like Veep, basically, like just like
and
dumb people in Washington D.C.
Yeah, and, like, if you had predicted this weird dystopia that we were gonna be in, I was joking with somebody the other day, like, we don't even get, like, the cool Mad Max Fury Road apocalypse. We get the Burn After Reading apocalypse, where,
Right.
like, we're just ruled by the most idiotic people ever, where the end of the movie is just like, what have we learned? And it's like, credits, and
I love,
that's
and
what it
that's
is.
such a perfect thing of like, rewatching so many of their movies, of kind of like you said, like the plots to their movies are kind of like convoluted and don't really like, they're kind of hard to parse out, but you're so captivated by the characters and the world that they've created that you're just sort of going along with it from like ridiculous set piece to ridiculous set piece. And
from that perspective, I would say with Nolan's Odyssey coming up soon, like, don't sleep on Oh Brother Where Art Thou either, because it's one of George Clooney's best performances.
It is. My secret favorite one is I don't know if I've ever told this to Jason, which would be fascinating, because Jason, like, is chair for the Atlanta Jewish Film Festival. But A Serious Man is my favorite, and like I'm
That's
not
fair,
Jewish,
yeah.
which is weird, because that's such a like. I've heard from so many people who are like were raised Jewish that they were just like that's just like one of the most Jewish movies that's ever existed. But even for someone who like grew up in a like church environment, I think that movie is so darkly funny. I think it's like maybe my second funniest movie behind Big Lebowski, but also is kind of like the antithesis of like everything their movies are all kind of about, which is like the world is like a terrible, scary place, and like bad things happen to good people all the time, and like what's the reasoning for it? I don't know. You just gotta laugh and like move through life, and that's
it's
kind
the
of what that
comedy
movie is
version
about.
of comedy version of No Country for Old Men, you know?
Yeah. Or like I've always found it funny how that movie is basically just like, let's do the Book of Job, but place it in the 1960s and make it like a nightmare comedy of just sort of like Michael Stuhlbarg going around to all the rabbis, be like, what am I doing wrong? And like every answer they give is just like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe God hates you. Maybe not. Maybe not. I don't know. And then like that's how
sometimes
the movie
life
ends.
sucks, man. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
And I don't think you're alone in that, because, you know, a lot of us critics are revisiting these best of the 2000s lists, and A Serious Man is getting some real placement on a lot of these lists.
It's high up there on mine. Well, speaking of the best movies of the century list, just to give kind of a preview on what we'll be discussing in the coming weeks, I think once Jason's back, we're going to do a fun episode where we'll talk about our Atlanta Film Critics Circle list of the best movies of the century, some of the trends and notable additions to that list, as well as I'm sure we'll give some of our favorites of the century. We'll, of course, talk about the adaptation of Stephen King's The Long Walk, which you are hosting a Q&A for. I'm greatly looking forward to.
Yeah.
And then you and Jason get to witness me go full film nerd as we talk about my dear Paul Thomas Anderson and his new movie, One Battle After Another, which I am just so insanely excited for.
PTA back in the world of pension.
Yeah, or not.
Yeah,
or not.
We'll see.
I did read. He did kind of say, did you? I don't know if you read there was the like, I think it was like Esquire or someone like did. It's kind of a bad interview because neither one of these guys are incredibly like conversational, but it was like PTA and DiCaprio interviewing each other, and they sort of like, there's like a couple moments where they like try and talk about like personal stuff, and then they're like, nah, we're not going to do this. And then they're just like, the second unit director though, we should talk about him.
Yeah.
He's like a really cool guy. But
because we all know that like, if there's anything Leo loves talking about, it's his personal life.
Yeah, but I did think it was funny where like in there, like Leo was a bit like, everyone keeps talking about Vineland, but I don't think you ever mentioned Vineland when talking about me within this movie. And Paul Thomas Anderson is just like, yeah, I mean, it's kind of inspired by Vineland, but like Vineland's not that good of a book, so I didn't adapt it, you know?
Fair.
So